Hi, I'm Austin Wintory. It's been like 6 months since I did a Q&A video. In fact, the last one I did was in a hotel room in Bangkok while recording the music for Thai Cave Rescue, now out on Netflix. Very proud of that. If you've not had a chance to check it out, thanks for those that have taken a look at the videos I shared here from that. But there were some old questions left on that video that I'd love to get to now, plus some new ones recently left. So let's just dive in. First one, what do you listen to? I know you've spoken about listening to film scores from Goldsmith and others you'd admire, but I suppose you'd research unfamiliar music or find people like Taylor Davis and Muluka through Journey covers, etc. It's a bit of a well-worn trope for composers, especially those working in film and TV, to constantly advocate that people listen to music other than soundtrack albums. Forgive me for essentially echoing that same sentiment. Now, I've heard others, I remember in particular John Powell kind of making it sound like, for the love of God, don't listen to soundtracks. And I think that a lot of that belief stems from this assumption that soundtracks are intrinsically derivative, that they, because of the working conditions of writing a score, the reality of collaborating with non-musicians like filmmakers, game developers, etc., means that a film score or a game score, a television score, is sort of bound to be less original than some cutting-edge album or live show or concept piece or whatever, concert music, that kind of thing. I reject that. I think if you look at John Powell's own music, in which he often creates these meldings of genre and production techniques that is highly original, highly innovative. Dan Pemberton, Ludwig Göransson, Alexander Desplat. There's many, many examples of composers who I think are writing objectively interesting music. And of course, before them, Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, the list is endless. So yes, the world of soundtrack albums is a treasure trove, both then and now, of wonderful, interesting, or sometimes just enjoyable, with no frills kind of music. All worthwhile. But it should not be the be-all end-all of a composer's listening diet, I would say. I do a lot of listening as part of research. For example, if I'm trying to get a certain kind of sound with a score where I want it to have a very kind of, edgy sense of percussion, I might go listen to a lot of metal albums or hip-hop albums or even like, kind of straight up pop things, to just kind of analyze how are they making, like if I'm zeroed in on something very specific. Okay, I have a kick drum in this that I want to have a very specific quality. I'll just go and start to listen to a lot of things and see what else seems to have that kind of quality. And can I figure out how they achieve that? Is there something I can learn from this? I also do a lot of listening is with regard to research. The music that is playing under this video right now from the project that I mentioned a moment ago, the Thai Cave Rescue. I spent a year and a half going to Thai music classes with my wonderful partner in crime, Susie Sider. And we spent 6 months in Thai music classes, and I spent a year and a half daily listening to Thai classical music, modern Thai, both modern versions of Thai traditional music and modern like Thai pop music, in the hope of really absorbing as deeply as I possibly could and not just gathering from the surface. And I do these kinds of things on just about every project across a wide swath of genres. I also sometimes just go into Spotify when I'm out riding my bike and just click on something at random, or I let it autoplay into a thing where I don't know what it is. And I love making fresh discoveries that way. Highly, highly encourage, especially, just for any music lover, but especially for young composers who really need to expand their diet. Have any tips for the mastering portion of the final mix? This is a tough one. It's basically worthy of its own entire video. And if you go look elsewhere on YouTube, you will find whole courses on mastering. So I just wanted to answer it as a way to kick the can essentially to other sources. This has never been my strong suit. Most everything I've done has been mastered in combination either by like a first pass by me and a final pass by most often Steve Kempster, with whom I've worked for well over a decade and whose taste and aesthetics I trust more than my own. But even when it's something I'm doing entirely by myself, It's a thing I try to apply a light touch on. I think there is a tendency to overdo it in an attempt to just kind of scratch at it and lose all objectivity and assume it's not done, it's not good enough, it's not done. And then before you know it, you've kind of squashed it into garbage. I also think there is a bit of a tendency to equate louder to better. Sometimes when we master things, we apply a plugin thinking we're doing X, and in reality, it's just made it louder, and then we think we like it. And then if you listen to it under different circumstances, you realize, oh, it's been kind of mangled to hell. So I think being gentle is just a general good aphorism for mixing and mastering alike. But it's worth its own standalone video at some point, I think. What is your process during the earlier parts of production? For example, how do you find a creative direction and present it to the director? How do you plot out the dynamic musical elements for games, like the interactivity? On a different subject, how much does knowledge of programming help when composing for games? Well, that second one I can do just real quick off the top here. I did study a bit of programming when I was in high school, C++, Java, HTML. I have largely forgotten it, but I retained the sense of orderliness that good programming instills in you. When you talk to programmers and you get a sense of what's sort of good code and what's sloppy code, it is often about efficiency. It is often about clarity. And I find that having a sense of logical coherence and a real never losing sight of the through line of a goal can be enormously helpful when approaching games and when getting into the ideas behind systems driven music and that sort of thing. So I would say it has served me a lot, even though I haven't written any code in 25 years. It is a valuable thing to have an understanding of and a grasp of, at least for me. I would never say that it is a roadblock, but as with all newly learned skills, what's the harm in learning a new skill? That said, the process for starting, I intentionally don't have a kind of regimen type process, meaning a ritualistic, every time I sit down and approach it this way. Some composers really thrive on the idea of, I wake up at this time, I have my coffee, I start writing, I then do emails, I then have lunch, I then write some more in the afternoon, blah, blah, blah. Very, very particular schedules that are very consistent, very kind of prescribed. I've never been like that. Anytime I've tried to be like that, just out of curiosity, I've found that it's, at best case scenario, making me write music in a very streamlined way like I do every day. And that's no good. So I tend to embrace a slightly more, shall I say, chaotic approach, meaning I like to approach each one a little differently and just let the circumstances speak to how I do it. So if it's a project that I'm starting where there's very little concrete or tangible about it, I will embrace that and freely experiment, and then we'll just see what starts to stick. If it's one of those where I'm being brought in and there's a lot that's very known, I'll spend a lot of time having conversations with the developers or the other creative team, filmmakers or whomever, to really kind of get them inside my head and try to benefit from their running start. Well, even just those two form very, very different early days. I even don't write music the same way each time. Sometimes I sketch by hand. Sometimes I sit in my computer and I fiddle with creating sounds before I even really begin composing anything at all. Sometimes I sit at the piano and turn on my voice memo kind of tape recorder on my phone and explore things, for 20 or 30 minutes, just trying to work out 4 or 5 notes in the right combination, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Point being, I do often try to come up with something high level, like whether it's a theme or a sound palette. That is often a thing that happens early. Even then, that's not a guarantee. Sometimes I just go straight in for writing a very specific piece of music on a project just to see how it works. But generally speaking, letting the natural differences of just different projects define different processes each time. I know from Play Watch Listen you were a huge fan of the first Plague Tale. Have you played Requiem? I love the soundtrack. I was wondering if there was another talk with Olivier de Rivière somewhere in the future. I have only just dipped my toes in Requiem. I immediately loved it. It just reminded me of how much I freaking love the original game. I can't wait to get into it. As soon as I heard the first big choral cue in this one, I had seen that Olivier recorded the choir in Estonia and was very excited to hear what he did with that. I just was all in. I don't currently have any scheduled chats with him, but I would never be opposed to it. I certainly enjoyed. If you want to check out the previous one we did on the Game Maker's Notebook, I've put a link below to the playlist of Game Maker Notebook episodes that I've done. There's always more of those coming, and the one with him was definitely fun and very interesting. By the way, if I didn't get to one of your questions that you've left on the prior video, either 6 months ago or in the last few days, feel free to copy paste it onto this video, and when I make another one of these, hopefully maybe in a month or two, I'll catch it then and hopefully get to it. So thank you again so much to everybody who kind of engages with this and has fun with it. There's a lot that are very thought-provoking, and it's just a lot of fun to do. I really like knowing what's in the curious minds of those that pay attention to this channel, so thank you again. Next one is, to what extent did classical music inspire and or improve your music? I definitely come from a classical sort of training, and so I've always enjoyed immersing myself in the repertoire. I go to a lot of concerts, chamber music concerts, and even the occasional recital, much as I did in university days, and quite a few, orchestral concerts, opera, that sort of thing. So there's no question that even though I consider my music to be more experimental than the sort of run-of-the-mill concert music world that is typically kind of anchored to a very prescriptive set of instrumentation, like types of instrumentation and parameters and things like that. And this is a luxury afforded doing soundtracks, by the way. That experimental nature is hard to do if you want to have something performed live. So setting that caveat aside, I can't help but feel a strong resonance with that particular type of repertoire. And even though I listen to a lot of music, apropos the answer to the earlier question of what kind of music do I listen to, I do spend a disproportionate amount of time probably with classical repertoire, revisiting classics, learning new ones, seeing what's being written in the concert music world today, and or just recent works, latter half of the 20th century, that kind of thing. So yes, it's a big part of my life. I love the orchestral tradition, and it's sort of a lifelong study. Who are my favorite composers? Well, I make no attempt to hide that Jerry Goldsmith is certainly my all-time favorite in probably ever, but particularly in the world of Hollywood. There are many others I could speak about in the concert music world. There's a few. I'm a fanatic for Leonard Bernstein. I absolutely adore his writing. I think West Side Story, both as a piece of composition and as a theater piece, is one of the greatest works by any American ever. I also rather like quite a few of his concert works, in particular the Kaddish Symphony and the Serenade for Violin and Orchestra. There's a lot of wonderful works that Bernstein wrote. Bartók is another composer that I think brought together disparate musical ideas in a way that is truly unique and spectacular, and I really never get tired of. Amongst more modern composers, John Corigliano, I think remains for me one of the most absolutely phenomenal composers alive today. I could go on and on and on. Do you think there is an intrinsically curious or mysterious element to music and aesthetics? I don't know how to answer this other than to say, yeah, I think so, but probably more accurately, I would say it's not that music is curious, it's that composers, the best composers, tend to be curious. I'd like to think of myself as very curious, but I certainly see that in the ones whose work I admire the most. They're always seeing what's over that next hill. They're not just trying to repeat something that they're familiar with. There are those kinds of composers, and I have no gripe with those kinds of composers. I would put someone like John Taverner or even Philip Glass in that camp. Somebody that feels like they're seemingly, I'm psychoanalyzing them from the outside, to be endlessly pursuing mastering one or a few specific ideas. I tend to gravitate towards the composers that chisel an idea, feel like they've wrapped their head around it, set it aside, pick up a new piece of clay, and start seeing where that can take them. That's a tradition that, we see epitomized in someone like Beethoven, but really, I think is especially true amongst many modern composers. There's a constant searching, and I would say that of myself as well, absolutely. Have you ever conceived very rapidly of a perfect piece or just a melody purely in your head? I've told the story a million times of how the theme to Journey, later called Nascence, appeared sort of in a sudden burst in my head moments after I walked away from my meeting with Jenova Chen, and I was able to send a recorded version of that theme. A few hours later, I got Tina Guo and Amy Tatum to come over to my studio and lay down the cello and bass flute parts, and do a quick mock-up of the string orchestra and fire it off within a few hours. That is not typically how it goes, but also in no universe would I refer to it as a perfect piece, because what's to say there isn't some version of it that could be tweaked or improved. I do believe that it's a simple piece, and that is a strength of it, and especially when coming up with thematic material, simple is pretty much always better, but that doesn't mean perfect. I don't know that there is such a thing as the perfect piece, other than maybe The Rite of Spring. A question I've been wondering about is creating a unique sound. How do you go about creating a fitting and consistent sound for your projects? How do you avoid just sounding like everything else inside the genre? Well, the first one is to not feel constrained by genre. Sometimes that can be tricky if you're working with collaborators who have a tendency to think in terms of a genre, but you can always test the boundaries. Genres are semi-arbitrarily drawn lines that we use in order to classify music as a communication shorthand. They don't actually exist in any real way, and so I think it's easy to fall into the trap of writing to a genre rather than thinking, oh, I wrote a piece of music, I wonder what genre it kind of most aligns with, and then letting it be more of a post hoc description and not an initial prescription, as just the beginnings of an answer to that question, of which I could make an entire video. Do you or did you ever score study? I don't know, you tell me. Guilty. Okay, final question. I've been composing for student projects for quite a few years now, and although I really like writing for screen, I must admit I often doubt when I make music for bad projects, which is pretty often with student projects or with unkind directors. I get really angry when my music is rejected, not so much because it is rejected, but because of the way student directors reject it. Call it not good enough, never acknowledge the time and energy I spent working on the project for free, etc. I find it very hard in these moments to be considered as a worker who has failed rather than an artist that has made an unadapted proposition. I assume probably unadopted proposition. I don't feel like there's just one way to score a movie, so when a director gives me carte blanche and then tells me my work is not good enough, I get very frustrated and feel like it is their fault. So here is my question. Do professional composers always have to deal with these situations? Does it stop being frustrating when you get paid? Do better directors avoid these situations either by knowing what they want or by being more tactful? Do I have to be less sensitive or more humble? Or will it be easier with better directors? This is a superb question. First off, go watch the Hollywood Reporter roundtable with Danny Elfman and a handful of other composers. They speak a little bit to this. I'll leave a link to it below. It is very clear that no matter where you are in the industry, from an icon, the likes of Danny Elfman or Hans Zimmer, to somebody who's just starting out and scoring student films, these are challenges that are universal. There are always going to be directors that are completely tactless. There are going to be directors that are genius but tactless insofar as they do pull good music out of you, they do make good films or games or whatever, but it is not a pleasant experience, and they are hard to work with, and it becomes a question you have to ask yourself of, does this feel worth it? And I think it's going to probably depend on a lot of factors, like, well, how good is this for my career, or how good is this for my wallet, or do I get along with them just well enough? Now, of course, the best collaborations are the ones born of a deep mutual admiration and respect, and in which the director is actually quite good. And of course, the best of the best are when both of those things are true, and they pay you, hand over fist. Now, it's rare that you kind of nail the perfect trifecta of those, but it's worth remembering that every project is going to have different sort of locations along the spectrum of from horrible to ideal in all of those different variables. And you have to kind of just gauge for yourself if this one feels worth it. Does this serve long-term goals or long-term relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Generally speaking, though, I think it is the lesser experienced directors that tend to be more tactless, because we're social creatures. Human beings respond well to being encouraged instead of scolded. When I was growing up, my mother would say, you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. And I think that is a general truism. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not incumbent on you to develop a thick skin, because there are times when a director is not actually being tactless in their mind. I've had plenty of directors that I've worked with, both in film and in games, who will say things like, this isn't working. And I think I'm thinking it's given me a lot of doubts about how we're approaching this, and I just don't know. I just don't know what to tell you. Where it feels like they're basically telling me you're not adequate, but they don't actually say that. But if you're feeling vulnerable, something along the lines of what I just said will feel like you're not good enough, and that's your problem. But sometimes a director doesn't know what they want, even great directors. Sometimes they're sure they know what they want, and then as soon as you give it to them, they look at it with some, fledgling amounts of objectivity, and they realize, oh wait, I don't think this is going to work. And that's part of the job. That, I think it's actually kind of a fun part of the job, because you're in it together. You're both kind of mutually on the back of one of these bucking broncos, both trying to hold on. Never lose empathy for the fact that they are making a game or they're making a film, and they're being faced with thousands of decision trees per day, per hour, that the quality of the final product hinges on. And so the stress of that, the burden of that, never mind the fact that, especially in the case of, larger game studios, there may be dozens or hundreds of people's jobs who depend on the kinds of answers that these directors come up with. And they don't know what's going to be the best one. And sometimes they have to iterate. Sometimes they just have to take their best guess. And the combination of not knowing and the stress of feeling that burden can make them less tactful than we might like. So I think it is a worthwhile skill to develop a thick skin, even while acknowledging that the best directors are very encouraged, at least my favorite directors. I don't even know if I would go so far as to call them the best, because that sounds objective, and I'm not sure there is an objective measure here, but some of the most effective directors that I've really cherished working with, even when they're very demanding, are respectful, and they're very appreciative of and understanding of what I'm doing. In other words, it's not lost on them how hard I'm working. They're appreciative of it, but that doesn't make them less demanding. And there's an argument that could be made that I'm actually encouraging them being demanding by feeding that fire. Everything they ask, I say, yes, let's try it. Let's do it. It's 3 a.m. They call, what if we did this? You know what? Let's try it. I'll have it to you by 5 a.m. Whatever the case may be. I may be, not drawing a boundary, and then therefore they're crossing that line. That's a decision that I make that is going to vary director and project by project. And you, in turn, need to make as a judgment call individually on each project for yourself. I don't think there is a hard and fast rule. There's been plenty of times where, it's like, I'll talk to you between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday. And then there's others where it's 24/7, I'm at your beck and call. In fairness, being honest, I pretty much won't take a job unless it's someone I feel comfortable being at a 24/7 beck and call for, because that to me is a criteria for accepting the job. But these are personal decisions, and these are also things that evolve over the course of one's career. I definitely did a lot of student films, per your question, for thankless directors, including a lot of very unearnedly arrogant directors who were so convinced they were the next Steven Spielberg, despite the fact that they were making their first non-sync sound 4-minute short film. And that's, I think, just a rite of passage for working with people who are borderline amateurs, if not straight up amateurs. In that way, I can say it gets better, thank God. More experienced directors tend to not be like that. But you're, invariably going to meet people with big personalities, big egos, and a test of your skin's thickness in working in this industry is going to be how well you work with those folks. There's some composers that really want nothing to do with people like that, and so they would turn down projects like that. There's others that gel with a wide range of personalities, and so they enjoy the rough and tumble of it. There's some that may even gravitate towards those kind of more brash and arrogant types. Maybe there's a bit of that in their own personality, and they enjoy having a director that's more like a sparring partner than a kind of nurturing, creative cohort. To each their own. One of the wonderful things about the size of this industry is that there really are opportunities for all different personality types to mesh and find each other. I don't feel this burden to get along with and to naturally gel with every kind of director that's out there, in the same way that I don't feel the burden to be the right fit for every game or every film. I like to present a vision and my personality in a very transparent way as a declaration, so that they can kind of gauge for themselves if I seem like a good fit, and then I can do the same. And occasionally I've taken projects that later turned out to not be a good fit, and it was very unpleasant. But generally speaking, the more upfront you are about who you are and what you represent and what you're trying to do creatively and how you hope to help them, the more you can kind of establish if you really are on the same wavelength early on and get past a lot of the kind of unpleasantness you're describing. So I hope that's not too vague. I hope that helps. Thank you all again so much. Again, please leave future questions that you'd love me to tackle on here. And one last question for you that I'd love to see you answer in the questions below, if you'd be so kind, is let me know what kinds of videos that you like best on this channel. I do a wide variety, from the podcast to the under the hood, the raw session footage, general previews of upcoming projects. Perhaps to the channel's detriment, there's a pretty eclectic mix of videos that I put out there. And I'd love to know, what are the ones that you find yourself watching the most, that you like the most, if I should find myself needing to focus it more and specialize more. So thank you very much for that, and we'll see you at the next one.